Hello, good morning. I hope you're enjoying the second day of Creative Careers Day. This year's theme addresses art as a voice and how to use it, and we talk about like personal and collective practices and how it addresses different social issues or kind of like working in the industry, I guess. So the topic that we will be speaking about today is about procrastination and the uncertainty of creative projects. And here we have a group of creative practitioners and cultural workers, and they'll be reflecting on how their ideas have evolved through uncertainty. And they'll also explore procrastination as a space of negotiation, care, and possibility, and how projects take shape over time through process and the realities of making work at our present context. So we have with us our moderator, Farida El Hady. Yeah. She's a university student at the American University of Sharjah. As for our panelists, we have Lisa Lechgar, who's an arts management specialist. We also have Carlos Paez Gonzales, and he's an interdisciplinary theater artist. Also happens to be a game designer. Yeah. And we also have Vijaya Chikarmane, who's the founding editor of Writing Women Collective. Yes. And lastly, on our right side is Kath Dizon, who's a music artist, producer, and co-founder of Halo Halo Experiment. Yeah. I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. Yeah. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. I want to start a bit broadly and get a sense of how procrastination manifests across all of your fields. So how do you find that, like, what's the way that procrastination shows up in your process? I'll start with Lisa and then we can...
Good morning. Procrastination has got a lot of negative connotations. And, if you look in the dictionary, it's deliberately not doing anything. And so rather than that, I think we're talking about the period of play. At the beginning of a creative process where you are testing things out, you're failing. Failing is very, very important in the creative process. And you're playing, and you're going down avenues of inquiry. At the end of the day, our fuel is curiosity. And sometimes that will take us to a block end, and sometimes it'll take us on a long journey. We don't know. So it's procrastination. I prefer to replace it with another P, period of play. and factoring that into a creative's journey, and certainly from an institutional perspective, having that contingency at the beginning of a project where that can be allowed within the framework, I think is very, very important.
That's very interesting. Microphone. Is it okay? Okay, I'm gonna jump off a little bit on what you said, actually, because I find it really interesting, because I love being in the period of play. I'm an expert procrastinator. Jared really chose well for this panel. And what I found, so I'm a theater maker, and theater is always collaborative. Always, always, always. And what I found is that not everybody really enjoys being in that period of play. And actually, a lot of people want to know where we're getting at, where are we going, why are we doing all this mess, and why is nothing coming together, and where are we showing this? What is the purpose of me being here? Why am I investing so much time, energy out of my day that's already really exhausted and whatnot for things? And so what I find then becomes a procrastination. In my past 5 years after I graduated from university and spent 5 years kind of trying to make theater in Abu Dhabi, was that the big procrastination came from not knowing and having a lot of uncertainty of where are we going and what are we doing, and therefore people not really coming together effectively to make things happen. I always go back to my very, very first theater teacher who converted me from a science kid to a theater person from Venezuela. And she once told us, okay, when you make a theater show, the first thing you do is that you book a venue. And then you know that you're going to do this show at this place at this time. And then you go and you make auditions and then you prepare the show. Pa, 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 pa. But you know already where you're headed at the time that you start, and then you start developing. Obviously, not all theater processes are like that. Some theater processes are all about play until we figure out something, or until we're like, okay, actually, this doesn't work. Let's go do something that, like the quote unquote standard way, let's say. But I find that a lot of the times we're stuck in that place. And I think there's two levels to it. I think one of the levels to it is a sort of creative inertia and a lot of friction existing in the environment, both with people coming and going all the time, and therefore not having a consistent group of people that can constantly be making work, or at least not having the safety of those people, or the assurance, let's say. I think it's more about that those people are always going to be there. And there's other layers to that as well. But then on the other side, there's the policy side of things and the institutional side of things, which is that a lot of the times here, we don't know where the red tape is and what we can and cannot say, what we can and cannot do. And as artists, we oftentimes don't have the access to navigate those things, because it's the institutions that have access to those informations and who are actually trained on those informations. And it's paralyzing for a lot of people. And I've been trying to research that more and learn about it more to try to get past that paralysis. That's kind of my research project right now. But I think that's the two layers where it exists, and why what I've seen has kind of slowed down the production of especially new and experimental work in my field.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think to build on what's already been said, that procrastination does offer the space of play and curiosity. I think in the writing space, and in the editing space, there's also these moments. Like the process itself is very, you have moments of where you're doing something alone, and then you have moments of where you're doing something in relation to everyone else, and you're very collaborative. And so I think that there's space where, in that relational space, you're not in control, right? Like you don't always know where the project is going to go, or where this piece of writing, how it's going to evolve. And then when you're in your alone space, I think there's also a lot of fear and vulnerability. I think creative projects require. Sorry. I think the mic is not on. It is not. I think so. I mean, I think that coming back to this sense of fear and vulnerability, I think creative projects really demand that of you because they're so personal. And I think writing is a very personal endeavor, as many other things are. But it's so that I think that vulnerability requires some level of interrogation, some level of inquiry. I think when you're stopped somewhere and you feel like, essentially procrastination is the sense of putting something off, like this can happen tomorrow or this can happen another time. That sitting with that reflection and saying, why do I feel like I need to put this off? Is it coming from a place of, I don't know if this is good enough, or this is maybe not what needs to be said right now? Am I using my artistic voice as I should be using it? I think we constantly think and perhaps overthink a little bit all of those pieces. But I find that in the process itself, there's growth, right? Like there's outcome in that process. And I don't think our work is very outcome driven. It is also very process driven. And I find procrastination is a place for us to stop and to sit with something in a really meaningful way. And how we come out of that is also part of our outcome. And so I find it actually I lean into it. I feel in the work, I very much lean into, and I don't try and keep rigid with timelines. And I'm like, it's okay. Maybe it needs to just go how it needs to go. So yeah.
Thank you. I just want to add my perspectives on what they've already beautifully shared. So I want to share something from the perspective of I'm an independent artist, by the way, and I'm mostly self-funded. And, I have a day job that is completely not related to being creative or making music. So I want to also be authentic with my answers. Honestly, I find procrastination really interesting for me. So, you know, if you're an independent artist, creating something carries a different weight. And for me, I always find procrastination as a period of incubation. And I always find it fascinating because this period of incubation, for me, some ideas flesh out, but it sits there longer than it should be, right? So, but then usually there's no external pressures unless I create it. I mean, it's also a different story when there's an institution involved, which I'm sure we're gonna like discuss later on. But so yeah, unless I create the external pressure and there's commitment, it's a different relationship with my creation. But then yeah, again for me. Procrastination for me is more of a period of incubation and navigating through more ideas. But at the same time, I make sure to use the space to gain more clarity from my output. So yeah.
A few of you touched upon this idea of external pressures and that reflecting on your process as an artist or creative. I share your opinion. I think that also, especially when there's collaboration or institutions involved, that can really shape the way that you work individually. And I wanted to get more of your opinion on how do you navigate when you're procrastinating, when an institution or a deadline is involved.
Skip me because I'm sort of on the institutional side, so skip me for the moment.
I can start if you want. Yeah. Okay, let me start. Okay, so if there's an institution involved, it becomes a different relationship with my creation, right? So at this point, I don't wait for what you call emotional readiness. Procrastination will always be there for me, but yeah, I make sure that the incubation period, I use it for more research, for example, because personally, me, I'm more on over conceptualizing things. And then when I come to that point that, okay, this output might work for me, I do the work, like physical work, like practice and production per se. But then when an institution is involved, obviously, like I work on structure and yeah, less of like a personal preference, and and honestly, like that's how you respect timeline and your collaborators and your deliverables. So yeah.
I find that it keeps doing it. Sorry. No, so I find that for me, in the context of theater, specifically in how I've been working on it. So I fully agree with a lot of the things you're saying. I think when you work with an institution, you can't wait for this emotional readiness. This idea of inspiration that like you will see a beautiful sunrise in the top of the mountain and suddenly you'll feel inspired to make this beautiful piece of artistic work. That's not the way to sustainably make art. The way to sustainably make art is to show up and make a bunch of mistakes and just keep moving forward and craft it as you go along. And that requires just showing up and doing things, which sometimes, like I've heard like artists with a lot of years of experience in the visual arts world talking about being in the studio and just sitting there for 2 hours without doing anything and then going home. But that's still part of the practice of showing up and part of the practice of kind of keeping in time with actually making things. Another person who was a performance maker once also told me that when you have a deadline, you have to work with the deadline. And I think that's what really resonates with me, that sometimes I've had several times when somebody tells me, hey, there's this performance opportunity, it's a month ahead from now, and we need you to create something completely new. Are you down for it? And I'm like, sure. Most people would not take on this, especially like these are times when I have a full-time job and I'm doing other projects on the side, but then this project comes in and I have a month to make it. And I'm like, okay, let's go. And it always ends up being something that, you know, could have developed more, but at the point in time where it's shown, I'm working with the deadline, and this is where the project is at, and that's where it's happening. A third thing from another person, artist, director, this time theater director, that told me that she said that her work changed a lot once she stopped thinking about every project as being like the big thing that you have to work towards, and where she started thinking about every project as kind of like a part of a greater arc. She had a mentor, she said that she had a mentor who said to her, like, don't think about this project as that, think about how this project fits into the next 5 years of your artistic career and how this project is then going to inform things. So we're never reaching an end point. There's always a constant state of exploration. As Rebecca Cruikshank, who's a very dear friend and fellow theater maker, amazing human being, once said, we're always emerging. We're always figuring this out. And I think staying true to that, I think, is very important. There is something then to be said about the pressure, because I have worked with artists who feel a lot of pressure from institutions to produce work that feels very high quality. And I find that a lot of the times what ends up happening with that, and this is true also in other places when you see industry work in theater, that there's a certain toxicity and a certain, it's unhealthy. And like people damage their bodies and their mental health and their relationships through trying to push the work to happen in a way that it doesn't, that in a way that is trying to do a lot more than the deadline really allows for, let's say. But you know, it's all about that balance, and as you said, like, how do you respect that relationship and that timeline and that deadline? Yeah. Okay.
Hi. I think so. I think I sort of straddle both positions where I work for institutions, but I also am an institution. I'm not institutional as much. It's just a small project. But when you run an initiative and you have deadlines that you've set, and people are you need to submit things to you. People submit writing to me. I have to edit it, and we have to publish it. Obviously, deadlines and structure are important. But I also find that there's a responsibility as an institution to also keep space and be flexible. And I think about what that responsibility is as someone in a position of power over people who are creating. And they're submitting things, and I'm paying people, and there's a different relationship. And I think that there's a responsibility as someone in that position to understand what is going on with people. And I think that in this space, these are people-focused. We work with people, with communities, for communities. And so sometimes I think that maybe we need to stop and question, and I've had to do this and learn this, is that if somebody can't deliver something at a particular time and something is going on in their lives, and what happens? So they don't deliver it. So I don't put something out the time that I said I was going to put it out online, or it doesn't get published the day it was meant to get published. So what? So what happens, right? And I think that if we can demand maybe more from our institutions to rethink what it means to push ourselves constantly to produce and to meet timelines and to meet deadlines, which I feel is a very colonial way of institutional, engagement, right? If we can push institutions and groups to think outside of that, then what do we gain from it? And for me, that looked like, if I couldn't do something, I would actually be very transparent with the readership or the audience to be like, actually, we wanted to do this today, but we're not going to do it because, something is going on in the world. And this is not the time that I'm going to be putting this out in. I remember so we had done a call for submissions in 2023. I was, we had we had released a series, and people were engaging, and they had sent some things in, they had sent some things to edit. And after October 7th, and during the early months of the genocide, I felt so immobilized, right? Like I could not engage in a piece of work that was not about the world and not about what was going on, that didn't engage and be honest about it. And so I felt, and I put it out to the group and to our audience, to the writers themselves, and said, listen, this is what's going on with me. I understand if it's going on with you. We're going to take a break, and we're going to take space. And that actually led a lot of people to engage with us more deeply, because I think they were feeling it too, right? And I think there's a sense of consciousness that maybe when you're working alone and you think I have this really big deadline and have to make it, that you're separating yourself from sort of a collective consciousness of what is happening in a moment, that maybe this isn't like, that's forcing you to procrastinate, or it's like, you have to kind of go into that uncertainty, right? Like maybe it's okay. I don't know what was going to come from this, me being transparent about it, but we'll just go where it is. Maybe this changes the way the institution works. That's okay. So I think about it from that perspective as well. And I also do, I think, sometimes work with very lovely people in institutions who are like, I can't do this right now. They're like, okay, I understand. So yeah, I think that there's an element of that as well.
I feel like for me, procrastination always stems from this like imposter syndrome of, can you meet the standard that you set for yourself to like do the best for this project that you really care about? I haven't really worked on anything that I haven't cared about till now. I don't think I've been through that yet, and I'm not excited. But and I haven't figured out the code to like get out of procrastination except for research. I really enjoy research. And I find that it always like seamlessly transitions me into finding a way to start my creative process. What are some tools that you find seamlessly transition you into your creative process?
Okay. Hi. I have two thoughts to that. The first one is about the imposter syndrome. I had this epiphany around 2020, 2021, right after I had just graduated and I was trying to figure out what to do, and I was dealing with imposter syndrome. There's this video game called Among Us that was very, very popular during the pandemic. And in Among Us, there's one person. So it's a social deception game. You're trying to figure out who's the imposter and kind of call them out and vote them out of the spaceship. But the imposter has superpowers compared to everyone else. Like they can sneak through the air vents, and they are like a monster that has like all these powers and everything. And you fear the imposter. Obviously, I don't want to like scare people, but there's something empowering about being like, yes, I am the imposter. Fear me right now. There's something about imagining yourself as empowered that I think is really wonderful as well. There's this amazing Rwandan theater director called Hope Azeda, who I met recently, and she was talking about doing a lot of work with people, genocide survivors from Rwanda, and that a lot of the work is about how to imagine themselves, instead of as victims, as victors, as people who are victorious and who are winning. And that gives you energy to kind of move forward, which takes me to a second thing I wanted to say, which is that in a lot of my theater training, one thing that has constantly come up is this idea of a yes muscle. The ability to say yes and to just push forward and do something, even if it looks super cringe or it's going to be really weird or it's going to be something, to just be able to say yes to something and see where it takes you, I think is a very useful muscle. I find it a lot easier to say yes in a group rather than when I'm by myself. But I don't know, I don't have a solution for that. I'm still figuring out how to say yes when I'm by myself. But that ability to just go for something and commit to it, I think is super useful.
I'm gonna take some of your advice and try to be more spontaneous when it comes to my creative process. I wanted to ask you guys for instances where procrastination has actually, because again, like you mentioned, procrastination is always used as a negative term, but has it ever birthed something good for you? Yeah.
Yes, definitely, many times. I think it has birthed positive things for me. So, I mean, if I think about just there's a project that I'm working on right now. It's an anthology project, and it began in 2024, and we still haven't put out the call for pitches, which is going out next week. Little small plug, but it's a brilliant project. I've been so excited about it. I don't think there's that procrastination has come from a place of, I don't do this, or this is, I'm overthinking it or anything. But it is a project that has now grown into 7 co-editors. And I think a lot of times, feminist publishing is relational. It's not my name goes here and all that. So like anyone who's been engaged with it, we're now 7 co-editors. We're like, we're all going to do this together. And when you're working with 7 people to have an idea take shape and to give a concept shape, it takes time. First, it just takes time because all of us are doing different things as well. Like, we come to it when we come to it. Then all of us are in different mental and emotional spaces. And then the work itself evolves. But I think what we have today from where we began, if we had pushed through with a timeline that, was more structured and focused or rigid, we would not have had the concept right now that we have that I think is far more richer, and it just is much more moving. I think as a concept, it has more depth to it, and because it has had the benefit of all of these 7 different perspectives, which has taken time. So as in, I think that sometimes it really works to enrich the work. And I'm very, very, I'm glad for it. I think I'm very happy to have a process where everybody is okay with procrastination and, easy deadlines. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm gonna tell you guys a funny story. So I have this musical outfit. My artist name is Manic Mundane, yeah? So Manic Mundane was born in 2022 in the midst of COVID. And my Manic Mundane project came from a place of procrastination, a time of procrastination. So I've been trying to make and produce beats from my bedroom since 2010. That was after I disbanded from my original band. I was in a punk rock hardcore band, but we disbanded, and I'm like, after that, I still wanted to do music, but the thing is I can't write lyrics anymore for some weird reasons. So I started doing beats just from my bedroom with my computer from FL Studio, Fruity Loop Studio, if you guys know it. Everything started from that DAW. It was 2010. I've been trying to write songs, but nothing came out really that I like, as in at par with my standards, So imagine that was 2010. I keep doing music until 2022, but the music that I make is mostly instrumental. You can let me do this type of music, ambient and all without vocals, I can do it all day. But then COVID came, so I was actually stuck in the Philippines. I was never able to come back here at that time. And so I was on isolation in my bedroom. So I had some of my gears, my musical gears from here, shipped back to the Philippines. And I set up a bedroom music studio, like my computer, like a microphone and some synthesizers, because I'm into synthesizers. And so, interestingly, at that time, I was able to write songs. It was not my goal, but because maybe I was on this certain emotional intensity, I was able to write songs, like really with vocals, and I was able to finish this album in a span of 1 month. So it's like 12 years in the making. And I can say that, by the way, I released this EP back in 2022. You can check it out on Spotify if you guys want. I'm gonna sing like some of the songs after this during my performance. And what I just want to say is that, so for that project, I can say it's a product of my procrastination. It might sound negative to some, but to me, it's like the culmination of all the learnings I had like throughout the years. And I'm really happy. And after that, after the Manic Mundane release, I'm trying to write songs, and it's so difficult. So I have this other musical project called Madam Void. It's just purely experimental and synth-based. But yeah, procrastination is just fascinating to me. And this is not only the time I have a lot of incidences. I mean that procrastination is deeply involved, like both positively and negatively, but yeah, it's one of those most interesting experiences for me.
Just building on this question and the one before, from an institutional perspective, we don't have the liberty to procrastinate, but we do have the liberty of research. And often institutions are seen as the sort of the master, the bad person who's bossing the creatives around. That's completely wrong. It's a meeting of equal partners, both empowering and enabling each other. And I think some institutions should do well to remember that sometimes, when we're working on projects. But where I'm working at the moment, we have been developing a few projects that are coming online in May and October this year. Why are we developing those projects? Because we've identified a need in the sector. We are seeking to initiate momentum in that gap that can be continued either by our empowerment or by the consensus of momentum by various individuals and entities. But that period of play involves sort of mapping what is needed, what is there, what is not there, consulting key players within that subject matter, say, analysing and then making the recommendations that ultimately build into a vision of a framework, of a structure for an initiative such as an exhibition or such as an award or something. But it's always done in consensus. And I think, to work in isolation is a very dangerous thing to do. And going back to the previous question, somebody mentioned the importance of process. There are some initiatives that institutions can initiate that should not result in a defined outcome. It is about the journey itself that is of the value. And I think that's important to consider as well.
I 100% agree. And since we're getting all the secrets from institutions, how do you plan for procrastination or period of play within project timelines? Do you build a buffer time knowing that creatives often fall into this stagnant period, or are delays inevitable?
For institutions, once you partner with an individual or a group, there is already a definition of what you're going to be working on together. There's a project outline. That is the reason you've chosen them. You know, then you enter into a contract, basically, a project agreement where you define each other's scope of works and you sign on the dotted line, and there is a commitment there. There is discipline there. And yes, I've been involved in projects where, yes, there is always a period of research, and there's a period of production, and then there's a period of sort of development of the exhibition, be that the catalogue, be that the curation, be that the logistical side of putting on an exhibition, for example. But throughout there has to be flexibility, but there also has to be discipline on both sides. And I have been in situations where you give contingency, you give buffer, you understand, you enable, you empathize, and then you have to be the disciplinary. And you have to ring that bell and go, ghalat. Something is wrong, and we've come to a point now that we really need to address the elephant in the room. You know, and that's not a comfortable place to be, but somebody has to be mother and sort of ring that bell. I've not done it a lot, but it has to be done, because at the end of the day, an institution does not exist in isolation. It also has a reporting structure. There is somebody above the institution that you have to deliver to, whether that is an individual or whether that is an entity. So we are not the last port of call. And if we don't deliver, somebody above us who decides our funding or decides how we are empowered will cut the cord. So we do have to uphold that discipline and that commitment as well.
Vijaya, I wanted to ask you, you kind of touched upon this while you were discussing procrastination in collaboration or during a politically difficult period of time. Do you see procrastination differently when your writing is either personally charged or politically charged? And we kind of also touched upon this when we were talking alone about this idea of censorship. Do you feel like that has a lot to play when it comes to this uncertainty of when do I speak, how do I say what I want to say? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think that with writing, and I think that everyone has different writing processes. And I have seen that sometimes people who are writing very politically relevant and personally charged pieces they actually have really quick turnaround. You know, it's not always the experience that will lead to people taking loads of time or procrastinating or sort of sitting in this space of uncertainty. Sometimes it's actually very quick. And I think sometimes there's an urgency to also share voice. And when you are in a situation where maybe the institutions around you are not able to do that, you find places that are, and then you want to get it out as quickly as you can, because of specifically of this political precarity and censorship. So, for example, like I've had questions about whether I'll publish something on Kashmir or whether I'll publish something on Palestine. And I mean, I think there's different levels of censorship in different places. And so, that means something, but it's primarily an online space. And so we get writings from various different places. And each of those writers sit in their own political contexts. And so sometimes they want to get it out very quickly because they're like, you might publish something on Kashmir today, maybe 2 weeks from now you won't be able to. So, there's an urgency. Like, writers from Gaza to get things out because that's a reality that they want people to know about. So it's not always a question of, sometimes actually as a publishing space, I'm trying to keep up to that. And the procrastination is actually coming from me because I might not be able to keep up in that sort of, with that kind of urgency. But then, of course, it's, sometimes it's the other way around where I've had, a project that, and we have an agreement with a oral storyteller right now, and they've had a number of different things affect their life over the last year. And so that's really pushed, the timeline around, and that's okay, that happens. And so I think that it's sometimes the challenge is to go with different different paces, because that's what the people who are sharing their voice requires. And I think when we think of, even today we're looking at art as a voice and how that translates into, spaces of creative careers. I think I'm constantly thinking about what is the right way to platform a voice. What is the right way to platform an artistic voice, especially when it's not always my own voice. And so really understanding what is going on for a person in that moment, what the context is I don't think there's one answer. I think it's just really, it depends on the situation, it depends on discretion, and it depends on on what's going on. But I find that you have to always allow yourself to give space to all of those different things. It just can't be one formula either way. And I think there's also a kind of beauty in that, to be honest. I feel like you get really different kinds of voices coming together in different ways. And yeah, there's something very beautiful about it. And I think it also is a really lovely relationship you develop. It's like feminist work is very relational. You have great relationships with writers. As an editor, you're looking at their work. There's a very different engagement. And I love taking time with that and just, having space for that. So it yields beautifully.
Actually, Carlos and Kath, I wanted to ask you, we've kind of discussed procrastination in terms of like a very individualistic, like private sense. How does it feel or like how do you navigate procrastination when you know that ultimately you're going to be showing this to the public? Does that kind of put a pressure on you? And is that where the procrastination like kind of ultimately stems from?
I can start talking and then land somewhere. Check one. Okay. So in 2024, no, not 2024, 2025. But this started in 2024 because it was at the beginning of 2025. I was working on a project that was going to be shown at 421 Art Campus in Abu Dhabi. And it was gonna be the debut show of this new performance collective that we were working with. And as I mentioned before, I'm somebody who really believes in just like showing work and not worrying so much about the final quality of that particular thing, but thinking about it as an arc. Where are we going? Where are we headed? What I find is that both with the pressure of showing in public, but also with the specifics of working as a collective. Other people have different ideas of things. I was gonna mention at some point during the conversation, I had the thought that because we're all from everywhere, different people have different expectations of what processes and the final work should look like. So one of my dearest friends and collaborators who was also part of this project, she had just come back from 7 years in Lebanon. She was born and raised here, and then went to university in Lebanon, stayed there for a while, was doing great things in the theater industry there, and now is back. And she would say that in Lebanon, if you do one crappy show, it's gonna take a while for you to recover, right? Whereas here, what I find is, I mean, at least in Abu Dhabi, I can speak for Abu Dhabi, where yes, sometimes people might show up and be like, oh, what was this? And then not show up. But because there's not that many things happening, I find that actually the people who do show up are ultimately the people who are going to be invested no matter what, and the people who want to see the storyline and the development of everything. Eventually, there has to be some kind of growth to show to the public, but that experimental work needs to stay. All this to say that this performance collective has basically disbanded at this point, because that particular process I ended up pushing to show, and a push to get us a space to show and a deadline and everything. And eventually people, it was very hard to come back together. We did for a bit, and then eventually some people started leaving, and we got busy, and the collective did not continue. But the big issue ended up being that particular moment. And I think I'm at a point in my artistic life where a lot of the people who are older and maybe mentor figures who have had accomplished careers around the world or wherever, really believe in taking your time. And if it takes 2 years to make one project, that's okay. I want to make 10 projects in 1 year. I'm like, I just want to make, because I feel like that's where I'm at. I want to run, and I want to make a lot of mistakes, and I want to fill everything so that people can see that this is what can exist. Turns out a lot of my friends are not also in that state of wanting to just make. They, again, my friend who I said was from Lebanon, she also is somebody who can take 2 years to really obsess over an idea until it finally comes out into a performance where she's ready for it. And I think learning to then choose who you collaborate with depending on the pace, because collaboration, while you can think about it pragmatically, especially once you have the funding and the venue and the timeline, et cetera, you can think about it very pragmatically of like, okay, you have this skill and I need that role to be fulfilled, come join us. But when you're coming from a space of creation, where you have to make something brand new or even figure out things, I think that personality comes into account a lot. And it's really important to choose your collaborators, not just on what they can and cannot do, but also how they're gonna do it and what kind of energy they're gonna bring in. If you bring in somebody like me in the context of this project that we're talking about, I was completely out of sync with everybody else in the team in terms of what I wanted out of the collaboration, and that tore the group apart. So it's both learning how to choose who comes into the room, but also learning how to adapt yourself and how to set your expectation. Now I know that these people who were in the collective were still friends, and we might at some point collaborate again. And now I know to be a better listener. And now I know to come into the room trying to understand, okay, what is the expectation, and how to also communicate better. So a lot of people are like very indirect in the way that they communicate these things for one reason or another. So really trying to be clear on, okay, these are the expectations, which then also comes back to working with institutions a lot of the times, where I totally agree, like institutions are people, and it's important to remember that as artists as well, that a lot of the times as artists, we tend to be like, institutions need to give us more of this, and institutions need to do more of this, blah, 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 blah. But the institutions are people who a lot of the times are really passionate about what they do and are really pushing for the things for things to work. And as artists, we need to remember that as well. And I think approach the, oh no, is it okay? Okay. And I think approach the institutional collaboration much more like a partnership and a human-to-human collaboration.
So I'm gonna talk more about where the pressure is coming from. Like on my case, I'm not really worried about my final material or my final output. For example, on the day of my performance, let's say, the pressure I think is coming more from the dynamic of me creating like that process, because for me, I make my own project, like it's just me entirely. I don't have bandmates, for example. I don't have collaborators. So my process is quite overwhelming. So I do the writing, I do production, which is already very technical. And so the pressure, and also I have a day job, as I've mentioned. It's completely not related to my passion, which is music production. and being an artist at the same time. So from that point itself, for example, when I try to create or schedule myself for a practice, realistically speaking, it's like competing with my real life responsibilities already. So that's where the pressure is coming from. Yeah, it's more on the dynamics because once I feel, for example, that I found clarity in this process, I am more confident for like my final output. Like I'm not worried anymore, and also my number one audience is myself. I know my work. I make sure that I'm very much self-aware of like the project or the work that I'm doing, and so that's all.
Great. My questions are done. We've pretty much gone through everything. I want to thank you so much for this, for your time and for your honesty and vulnerability and this great conversation. I'd like to now open the floor to questions. If you have anything to share as well, any moments of your own period of play. Yeah.
Hi guys. So I remember you mentioned, sorry, you mentioned giving space to like artists that you work with when they're like emotionally troubled or anything. Like if they miss a deadline, that's okay. But from like a leadership point of view, if you want to get something done, and it's like your job, so how do you like approach that without like hurting them or I mean, I don't know if. Like in my case, I just take the work upon myself, which is really taxing. But yeah, like someone has to do it. But what if it's something completely different and you cannot take it upon yourself? Like, how do you approach that situation?
Hi. Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I would say that I think when people are have face there's something precarious happening in their life and they're facing delays or it's delaying a project, that's not going to be a constant, right? Like that comes in waves. And so I think what we're doing is creating a cushioning to allow somebody to ride through a wave of something difficult. But that there's an expectation when things are on the up of that, that they will deliver. And they're still committed to work, but it's just maybe not the right time for it. So I think that I think that helps. Like I think there's a certain expectation that that's not going to always be the situation. This is your situation right now, but that's going to change. And when that changes, it will also mean that something will be delivered and then the work will come back to this work. I also feel as though, when, at least in my experience, I've never had, and maybe I'm just being very lucky, I've never had this experience where somebody has not delivered with that once you give them that flexibility or that space. I think that they come back to it. Or, I mean, there are things that you can do, like you said as well, like, as like when you're in a position. I feel as though there's like, I have to also give the caveat that running, a magazine is, I'm not reporting to a lot of other people. And so that there's real privilege in that, right? That I don't have to say, oh, somebody else is, like I don't have timelines that I'm also working towards. It's really just sort of like, my accountability is to a readership. And that readership is a conscious, engaged readership that I want to interact with them. I don't want them to be passive readers or I'm just going to constantly deliver. If there's something going on, then there's, they engage back. And as I said before, sometimes when things are going on in people's lives, they engage more deeply with you when that space is given. So I think that is important. Plus, I feel as though in feminist publishing, it's a very value-driven space. So you have principles that you have set for yourself, right? Like these writings and these voices are going to be shared given a certain value framework. And those aren't just words. Like there are ways in which they translate into practice. So when we say we're feminist magazine or we're a decolonial space, like what does that actually translate into practice? Like, I don't think we can just say those things in terms of a content perspective, but not a process perspective. So I think it's a constant negotiation of also what does this process look like from a decolonial lens or from a feminist lens. And sometimes it means reassessing together or restructuring together or repurposing together. Because your cost, like you have to trouble that notion that your cost is not producing, right? Like it's what is the process and what is the cost of something going to be? And yeah, I hope that answers the question. It's more complicated, it, but.
So it does. Well, I don't know, because the situation is kind of different. So I'm gonna explain my situation. So with me, it was someone that was working under me, and his country was. I think you must have heard about the Syrian like genocide as well. So he was from that part of the world, and it was really bad, and it was like prolonged. So I didn't really know how to, like deal with that and how to go about that. So yeah, that was like the main concern with me. So I just didn't. I just did the work. And yeah, I had like someone to report to like above me as well. So that I think that's like the different, situation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I loved everyone's discussion points and everything. And I just wanted to ask a question. I think I have two parts to my question. But basically, what advice would you give to someone who has a day job, but may have this sort of artistic calling inside them, but they have no way of like identifying what exactly that artistic calling is, or in what ways could they possibly express that or bring that into play when maybe that's not something they've done before, and maybe the feeling of being socially perceived of putting something out there could be a blocker. So, yeah, that would be my question.
I can start. It's fear, isn't it? Fear is the block that stops us all from going, if only I could do that, and fear is part of procrastination as well. The wonderful thing is that here in the UAE, there are so many institutions like Art Jameel that cater for the reality of everyone. Everyone has a day job that they have to do to put food on the table, let's be honest. There are very, very few creatives in this country who live by what they love to do. Inshallah, it will grow, and it is growing, but it's an absolute minority. So you are part of the majority. And the wonderful thing is that institutions do cater for that. They do things at weekends. They do things in the evenings. They have open studios where you can come and go whenever you want. But it's up to you to find your tribe. There's lots of open studios around Al-Qars and so forth, and some people call them cliques. Other people will call them tribes, but you find your people. But you've got to overcome the fear and get out there and meet as many people as you can to find the right tribe for you. That's all I can say. Don't let the fear overcome you. You overcome the fear.
Just to kind of jump in on that, a friend and classmate from university, her name's Bernice, she co-founded a Filipino artist collective called Satahanan, which has been going and doing a lot of amazing, amazing things. I remember catching up with her a year and a half after we had graduated in the middle of COVID. And she was like, it was just a lot of getting over my social anxiety and going and actually talking to people. It goes back to this yes muscle that I was talking about, and you just have to sometimes go and be like, this thought is related, but not but yes, but no. Oh my God, this microphone. Should I just use a different one? All right. So my mom is a sound healer. It took her she only discovered this passion in like her mid 40s, and now this is her whole life, and she's like she's absolutely incredible in a lot of ways. I once got to do her training, her sound healing training, and one of the things for her is that she's also a trained classical singer. So the voice is part of her methodology. And one of the ways she talks about the voice is that there's two ways of singing. So the way you're usually taught when you learn like how to sing like classically in the West especially, is that you hold your diaphragm and you project out through here. And this is how you sing. And that, my mom calls it singing in the masculine voice. That there's this pressure in your pointing outwards, and you're making, and the masculine voice is important because it makes things happen and it manifests things. And then she talks about this feminine way of singing, where instead of holding your diaphragm in and pushing forward, you kind of relax, and it's almost like you're pregnant, and you let your torso expand, and you sing, and it's a lot more, it's a voice that really holds the space a lot more. I found for a while that actually I enjoy singing in this feminine voice a lot more than I enjoy this masculine voice, because I find that holding that space for others is something that I really love to do in my practice, in my work. But then having that ability to switch on this masculine, like, yes, I'm going to make this happen, and kind of protecting your space, as much as we are relational beings and we need to listen to each other, and we've been talking a lot about that relationship building, and that's really important to be in tune of. Protecting your space and saying like, I am going to do this, and just going for it is also a very important aspect of just showing up and doing work. And a lot of the times that could mean, sorry, friends, I know you're grabbing dinner tonight and that we were looking forward to this, but there's this really cool thing I need to go do or need to go see, and I'm sure we'll find another time to meet, but this is what needs to happen. Or sometimes it's like, oh my God, I was really looking forward to, I'll close with this. Sometimes it's like, oh my God, I was really looking forward to go home and like eating ice cream and watching Netflix and going to sleep. Oh my God, I miss my bed. And I find that you develop a stamina when you keep showing up to events and all these open studios and things, that is a muscle as well. And that's something that you develop. And the more you show up to things, the more you'll have that stamina and that energy to continue to make outside of your 9-to-5 exhausting job.
I hope we've answered all of your questions. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. I know we can keep talking about this forever, and maybe that's procrastinating. But yeah, thank you so much for attending, and thank you guys so much.